So 16 is encouragement. And going back, I'm so glad you brought that up, Israel. That would have been a huge miss on my part. And, there's the passage where Jesus is feeding them. Then he goes to the other side of the sea, or Sea of Galilee. And they meet him over there too. And what does he say to them? He says, you're following me because your bellies are hungry. You want bread. And so there's this sense that faith is being satisfied with what Jesus gives you in himself and what he provides for you, not his fringe benefits, not the side benefits. It's what he did for us in making us right with the Father. That is, it's who he is that is to satisfy far and above a meal ticket. And so that's what we have to keep in mind. Okay, so Exodus 17. We get into discipline and Amalek, okay? So if I'm right, Samuel, go ahead. That Samuel, I'd never thought of that from that perspective, but I think that that's a really worthy thought, because ultimately, what the manna was meant to teach them, and we'll learn in Deuteronomy 8, right, Israel, when we get to Deuteronomy? We'll learn in Deuteronomy 8 that God humbled you in the wilderness so that you may know that man does not live by bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. And so the manna and the water, miracle water, were meant to, and their clothes not wearing out, their shoes not wearing out, all that stuff was meant to teach them that God is enough. End of sentence. And that's where you see the faith exhibited with like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When they go into the fiery furnace, it's not, oh, I hope we make it out. It's, no, we're ready to die, and that's okay. Like, God's enough, more than our physical bodies, and it'll be okay. So that's where they're not just eating bread they don't like. They're about to get burned to dust. And they're fine with it because God's enough. Daniel, he's okay with getting thrown in the lion's den. He might get eaten. It's okay because God's enough. So the physical aspect for the true believer should not be a necessity to staying with God or leaving him. But for Israel, the physical aspect was a necessity to them. It was not enough. He took care of them through his miraculous provision, and it wasn't enough. They wanted the onions and the leeks and that. And that's why he destroyed them. Okay, so we are, and by the way, Shaq brought up something yesterday that I should clarify. He had brought out the question about in Babel, if we don't stop them, nothing will be impossible for them. Okay? And he clarified that question a little further because I had missed the intent of it. Okay, so here's I think the best answer to that question before we move on. So what does God mean, or nothing will be impossible for them? Okay, what state of the world did God put the earth in after the fall? Corruption. How does the Bible describe the earth right now? Groaning in the throes of child labor. Okay? Guys, if God blesses you with a wife and with children someday, that is not the picture your wife would want to hang on your wall of her face when she's going through child labor. It's not what she looks like. It's the most pain she'll ever be in, probably. And that's what state the earth is in. What I think God is getting, and that's what state he meant for it to be in. Okay? And I was explaining to Shaq, you guys may be familiar with an eagle. When the eagle forms its nest, it makes this big nest, and it lines the bottom of it with sharp bones or rocks or jagged things, thorns, puts it down there in the bottom layer. And then it covers up that sharp stuff with fur and skins and stuff to make it nice and cozy, okay? Well, when it's time for those kids, those eaglets, to get out and fly, you know what the mother or the eagle starts doing? It starts taking out the comfy stuff. It starts taking out the skin and the fur. So what are those little baby eaglets starting to feel? Discomfort, which makes them then learn how to gets them into the world of flying, because they need to do that to survive, okay? Well, that's essentially what God did with the earth. He inflicted on the earth pain. The earth not yielding to us anymore. The earth not working with us anymore. It's against us. It's not for us. It doesn't want to be against us. It wants to work with us. It can't wait to be out of its condition. It wants that to be over with. But God did that like we're the eaglets on the earth that are uncomfortable here with pain and sickness and sadness and death and mourning and sorrow and depression and all the bodily problems and everything. He gave us that so that we would not become earthy people, but that we would long for heaven. And he handed Eve over to her sin and her taking over the situation with her husband. He she's like doing this, and he touched her with a wand and made her stone. Now she's stuck like that. Now every woman from now on will have a deep-seated struggle with not trying to overcome her husband. So God gave us over to sin to make us sick of sin and pain and sorrow, and want us to look forward to heaven, okay? Now, what was happening at Babel? I think Babel was on the course to undo all of that, to try to make earth as good as humanly possible, to make heaven on earth. I think that's what Babel was up to. Just like I believe that the Genesis 6 people were trying to become superhuman, I think Babel was trying to make earth heaven. And God says, no, we'll mix them up. And as soon as he mixes up the languages, can people work together as easily? No. Then you start having war and discord and, nuclear crisis, and that's what you have. And I think he did that to keep pain in the world, ultimately. Because not having pain, but not having God is awful. That's not heaven. So I think that's what he was up to with saying nothing will be impossible for them. I think the import of that statement is they'll be able to make the best out of this life in the worst way. So divide them. It was a grace. Just like locking Adam and Eve in Eden, I think those two statements go together, like I said, and locking Adam and Eve in their fallen condition so that they die was a blessing, because they need to die to be reborn. So I think that's what we should think there. Okay, so going back to the bitter water and the bread. Okay, if that has anything to do with the test of adultery, which I think it's looming in the background, it's interesting that in chapter 17 of Exodus, thank you, they go to Now, by the way, what is the result of if you fail the test of adultery? What's going to happen to you if you're a woman? You'll become barren, right? And what is women's fruitfulness often compared to? What do you always find women next to? Wells. Okay? Running water, something of that sort. Okay? So did Israel, if we're right about the test of adultery thing, see, I'm including you with agreeing with me. If we're right. Now you all agree with me. All right, so if they failed that test of the bitter water and the bread, which they crumbled in both situations, okay, they will not be what? Fruitful. And fruitfulness is compared to running water, a fountain. All right? Look at what they run into next. And the people moved to the wilderness of Sin by stages according to the commandment of the Lord and camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So I think this is a subtle clue at saying in their unbelief, they will not be fountainous. And they came to a place where they needed water and there wasn't. So like the adulterous woman will become barren, they come to a rock that sort of shows them their spiritual barrenness. Something to consider. Okay, then after this experience, God gives them water. Moses strikes the rock, and this is what he'll do when he shouldn't do in Numbers 20, but this time it's okay for him to do it. God told him to do it, so he does it. All right, they go from the water, and then they get attacked by Amalek. Okay? Now, Peter Leithart wrote an excellent article just recently when Hamas attacked Israel. And he said that Hamas pulled a page out of the playbook from Amalek. Okay? And he wrote a great article for Gospel Coalition. Now, in that article, he asked the question, look at what God says about Amalek at the end of chapter 17. Verse 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Okay, now, they are going in to attack these people already, but Amalek gets singled out as like, I am going to get this guy, all right? And Leithart asked the question, why such animosity about Amalek? Yes, that's exactly right. He says if you look throughout Scripture, you'll find that Amalek attacks people that are vulnerable. They have a history of it. Look at Deuteronomy 25:18. I'm going to read a bunch of verses, so it might be hard to keep up. But Deuteronomy 25:18, Moses summarizes what Amalek did, and he says that they attacked among you all the strangers at your rear when you were faint and weary. Guys, I was telling you at lunch that I like to go on wilderness trips with some men around our area. And do you know who's in the back when we're on a long hike? The guys that aren't doing well. Maybe they got some altitude sickness. Maybe, their legs are really hurting, or they're just, they can't, they're huffing air. So it's the weak that hang out in the back. And so who did Amalek attack? So it's probably the elderly, the women, the children. It's pretty sinister. And then in 1 Samuel 30:2-3, it says, Amalekite raiders attacked Ziklag when David and his mighty men were marching with the Philistines to fight Saul, when only women and children were present. That's 1 Samuel 30:2-3. And then you find out that Haman is a descendant, and it is of an Agagite in the Amalekite world. Okay? So, what about, oh, and Haman, he's trying to attack Israel. Is Israel strong in Esther or weak? They're in exile, right? So they're beat already. And he's trying to annihilate them. And he's from the Amalekites. Okay, so here's what Lightheart says. He says that God singles out the Amalekites because they are the photo negative of him. They are the exact opposite of him. How does God tell you about himself? I am the father of the fatherless. I am the caretaker of widows and orphans. In other words, God singles out a special people to take care of, and those are the especially weak people that he singles out. Amalek does the exact same thing, except he does it to attack them. So you can't find a more opposite than God, than Amalek. And then Lightheart went on to say that that's exactly what Hamas did to Israel. They came and specifically chose the defenseless, And so it was a phenomenal article. Okay, and so God will make war with them. And, it's a real sad history because Saul is told to annihilate them. He doesn't. And then what's the last person you see walking by Saul as he's dying? An Amalekite. So the very people that he should have killed and didn't, which led to him dying, just kind of walks past him, gets his stuff as he's dying. And I can't remember, does he actually finish Saul off, or was Saul already dead? Anybody remember that? Yes. And that was the Amalekite? Yes. So yeah, David or Saul was finished by an Amalekite. Yeah, I couldn't remember if he just took something from Saul or something. I can't remember. Okay. Yeah, fascinating. Okay. Whoops, we get the same thing here. All right, 18. Jethro. I kind of gave you a hint here already, but they finish fighting the Amalekites, and Moses meets Jethro, who's got his wife, and he tells Jethro what God did, and Jethro rejoices, right? Who does Jethro remind us of? Melchizedek. Yeah, I think there's a great connection here. I just kind of started jotting out some commonalities. Jethro's a priest. Melchizedek's a priest. They meet after battle. It was a battle that wasn't asked for. They didn't start it. He rejoices, both Melchizedek and Jethro rejoice in the recent victory of God. He blesses God, both of them do. They eat with Moses, and they offer great encouragement. Jethro goes on to tell him, you can't handle all these people. You gotta, and Melchizedek blesses Abram. So you got 7 commonalities between Jethro and Melchizedek. But I would go on to say, what's the big difference? Yeah. Okay. Jethro, and I would say in this passage, I would say he gets converted. Yes. Now I know that this is the one true God. Jethro responds like Pharaoh should have responded. Yeah. And I think this is a hint to that the Gentile nations are going to come into Israel, because Jethro's a Gentile. They're going to come into Israel as a result of the news that they hear about God. Like Rahab, exactly. Yep. And Queen of Sheba and the Ninevites, and all through the Psalms. Yeah, guys, see, this is a big question. Sometimes people say, Okay, so let me ask you guys. Was the Old Testament a come and see religion or a go and tell religion? And is the New Testament a come and see religion or a go and tell religion? Old Testament, come and see. New Testament, go and tell. That's what most people think. That thought absolutely drives me crazy. Listen. Okay, so Israel, is that what you believe? I'm gonna come at you. All right. You believe that? Okay. So explain to me the 4 rivers in Eden that go to the ends of the earth. And that Adam just got told to fill the earth with God's images. Explain to me that Babel tries to gather together, and the first thing God tells Abram is to go. These, and Genesis 12, 1-3, that you'll bless all the nations. And we even know that the Pharisees believe this because Jesus says to them, you travel to the ends of the earth to make disciples, but you make them twice the sons of hell as you. So the Pharisees were missionaries. They had missionaries. What is Nineveh? And who told Jonah to go there? They're Gentile, pagan nation. Deuteronomy 4 says this law will be your wisdom in sight of the nations. So here's what I would say. I wouldn't say that either one of them is one or the other. I would say they both are both. That in the Old Testament, it was a go and tell and a come and see. It was both. And in the New Testament, it's a go and tell and come and see. So, you guys should be inviting people to come to Trinity Fellowship. And you should be raised up in Trinity Fellowship to go out into the ends of the world. It's both and. In both covenants, it's both and. Read Psalm 67 and tell me that that's not evangelistic. Let the nations sing, praise the Lord. Let the nations exalt. This is Israel singing to the nations. Psalm 2 tells all the kings, kiss the Son, lest he be displeased with you. He's talking to kings. He's talking to worldly kings, right? Nebuchadnezzar comes to faith. So the Old Testament was a go and tell as well. It wasn't just a come and see. So yeah, it's just an important, and I think it all starts with the 4 rivers that go to the 4 corners of the earth. It gets picked up in the 4-cornered altar, and then it gets picked up in the cross. 4-cornered camp to the east, to the west, to the north, to the south. He's going to enlarge their territory, he says. In Isaiah 54, he tells Israel, hey, take the tent pegs of your tent and spread them out, for your tent will encompass everybody. That is spreading out evangelism. That's spreading out gospel truth for the whole world. When God judges the nations in the prophets, does he only judge Israel? No, he judges Edom, all sorts of places. So God is God of the globe from the beginning to the end, and the globe is always in his interests. Even when they're going in the promised land, he'll say, you can't go in Edom's land because I gave that to them. You have to avoid this other nation because I gave that to them. So God demonstrates himself to be God of the nations all the time. So I think that's something to think deeply about, that the Old Testament is go and tell as well as come and see. Okay, 19. Okay, so guys, this is really important as far as the covenant. We learned this already in Genesis 15. But was the covenant given or earned? It was given. That's correct. Exodus 19, 4-6. You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. There's another example. Among all peoples. See that? That's a world statement. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. What's a priest? An intermediary. A priest is someone who connects heaven and earth, right? So Israel is a nation of priests. What does that mean for all the other nations? Israel's their priest. Israel's going to connect them with God. You see what I mean? It's all over the place. The world, the world, the world. These are the words you shall speak to the people of Israel. Okay, so this has some law in it, does it not? And it also has grace. Do you see that? Do you see how they're both featured? You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you. So they're his. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice. So what does that mean? Are they saved? Are they saved at this point? Okay, I think they are. I liberated you, you're mine. Now, if you obey, you'll be my treasured possession. And he didn't finish that statement, but he'll finish it later. And the answer is if you don't, I will disperse you among the nations. Okay? So, what is this? Do saved people die out of the judgment of our loving God? We've already been over this. 1 Corinthians 11. Saved people die. They do. Saved people get humiliated. You know, I had a dear friend whose dad was a pastor, and he had gotten involved with pornography, and nobody knew about it. And he was teaching the youth in the church, and he clicked his PowerPoint to go to the next thing or something, and what he had been looking at showed up on the screen. And he left the ministry and started a ministry to pastors in relation to pornography. So God redeemed it, but God doesn't want, if we mess up in getting into things that we shouldn't be getting into, God will remove us from our stations. Doesn't mean we're not saved, but he can't tarnish his name. He's a faithful God, and he will remain faithful to his name. And if we get in the way of that, well, we need to die. And we'll be happy that we did. Because we don't want to mess up the name of God, you know? So God's name's too valuable to let people misrepresent it. He wouldn't be loving the world if he let his kids misrepresent his name and keep blessing them in an untold way. And so I think that he's exceptionally gracious to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. But as you grow and as you get knowledge of him, you are more responsible. And so we could look at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and say, look at all the stuff they got away with. And you're like, well, look how much knowledge they had of God. We've got the whole story. So to whom much is given, much shall be required, right? We have the whole story. So there's a sense in which we're much more responsible with what we have than they were and what they had. And so there's a degree of, culpability with us. But anyway, they are his. And their obedience is to represent him. And as they represent him, he keeps blessing them. That's why you'll find in Genesis that when Abraham does obey God in a really good way and says, Lot, you take whatever land you want. I'm fine here. God just heaps blessing on Abraham. Why? because that looks like a child that left the bread at the table. Abram will stay in that dusty land instead of going down to the Jordan Valley, the lush Jordan Valley that was like Eden. He'll stay up in the heights because he says, you know what? I'm with you, and that's enough. And God says, I like that because it's true, and I'm going to bless you and make your name great. Israel goes down in the valley because they don't trust God. And God says, I don't like that because that makes me look like a father that doesn't care for his kids. And that's not what I'm like. So he says, you went among the nations and you profaned my name among the nations. Ezekiel will say that over and over and over. You profane my name. You don't represent my name. You profane my name among the nations. And so he has to beat them down. Any church that stops preaching the gospel is a church that needs to close or be reborn. Right? And he'll put a new people in that church that preach the truth. So that's the thing. We got to represent our Father well, for our sake and for the world's sake and for his great name. Okay. So Israel obeying the law would make them a treasured possession of his, that he could recommend to the world. We see some scary stuff here where he tells them to wash their garments as they're coming to the mountain, just like he told Moses to take off his sandals. But then this is what I told you guys about earlier. Moses says to them, and don't go near a woman. And that sounds a lot like Eve saying, but we're not supposed to touch it either. See, anytime you start adding commands to what God said, you're starting to make God in your image instead of his own. And so we see that starting to happen here. So we should start sort of expecting a fall to come, which it will come. Okay. Now, we get into Exodus 20, and we get into the Ten Commandments here. Now, I want you guys to notice something about the Ten Commandments. I'm going to draw it here. Okay, so we got the Ten Commandments. Now, let's just talk big picture here before we talk detail. All right, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, I want you guys to look at those commandments, and I want you to keep an eye out for something. Okay. Are there any commandments that to look at a person, I'm looking at Doggy right now, that I can't tell if Doggy is keeping it or breaking it? Just by looking at him. Look at the commandments, Exodus 20. All of them? In one sense, you're right. Yeah, and Jesus will point that out in the New Testament, in the Sermon on the Mount. Very good. But as far as externals, the external of a body, what commandments can you not see if someone's keeping it? Okay, do you guys agree with Doggy? And this isn't something I went over with him ahead of time, by the way. Do you agree with Doggy, the last one, you can't see if somebody's coveting? You agree? How come? You might be able to see that evidence. But you can't tell right now. Can you tell if I'm coveting your glasses right now? You can't tell. So I think Doggy's right. All right. So, number 10, You can't see if someone's doing it or not doing it. Is there another one? Shaq? Okay. Number one, can I tell right now if God is Shaq's God by looking at him? No, I agree. Okay. So, is there any others? Or are all the others demonstrable that you can see if someone's keeping it or not? Yes, number two, but that's number two, is carving an idol. So number one doesn't have anything material attached to it. Number two is where false gods become material. So number one's its own thing. And that's the point I'm trying to make. That the first commandment and the last commandment, you can't see if somebody's keeping it. Because where I'm headed, Abel, is what you brought up at the very beginning. So the commandments then, what I'm trying to say here is the commandments are bookended by invisibility, which is meant to say something about all the other ones. That if you can't see the first one and you can't see the last one, then maybe you can't see any of them like all the time. Now, yeah, you can see if someone's murdering, but you can't see if they're murdering them in their heart, right? So I think the way these commandments are given, for the thoughtful Israelite, they were meant to put the connection of, you can't see if someone's doing the first one, you can't see if someone's doing the last one. So maybe God wants all of these to come from the invisible place into the external place. Okay? So that's one thought I think it's important to consider the Ten Commandments with. Okay? Another thought is, which of these Ten Commandments are positive? The thought here that's lifted up is that, is it possible, Alistair Roberts proposes this, is it possible that near is the most we can say, near the center, there are two positive commands. Near the center is the best we can say. I think this would be more solid if it was these two, but it's not. It's these two. Now, one thing is that one's in the God world and one's in the man world, right? One's with, the first four have to do with God. The last six have to do with humans, like earth, you know. The first four have to do with heaven, so to speak. The last six have to do with earth. But Roberts proposes, and I think this is really worthy of considering, that the two positive commands near the center should get us thinking that in all of these, we should find a way to make them positive instead of just don't do it. Like, so, you know, let's go with number 8, which is you shall not steal. What does Paul say to the thief? I think it's in Ephesians. What's the first thing he tells him? Stop stealing. And then he says, work so you can give. Okay? So, do not steal is just don't steal. But because these two are at the center, or near the center, that's an indication that you should find ways to make all of these positive. So it's not enough to not steal, according to Paul, because 4 and 5, near the center of the Ten Commandments, pushed him in directions to say, well, if God has two positive ones at the center, then I should make all of them positive. So it's not enough to not steal. Instead, get a job. And that's not even enough to provide for yourself. Because you'd think, okay, Paul could have said, all right, hey, stop stealing from your brothers. Go get a job so you can take care of yourself. But Paul wants to go uber positive. He says, stop stealing, start working so that you can be generous. He wants Judah. Remember how Judah does the exact opposite of what he did before? You see, listen, repentance is not just, like if you're heading this way, repentance is not just stopping. True repentance is going back this way. So I used to be a bully and pick on people, but now I want to defend the weak. You see how that's like a polar opposite? I used to look at pornography, but now I want to honor and uphold women and help others out of that. That's the opposite. I used to be an alcoholic, but now I want to help others out of the alcoholic and their addiction. It's a complete and total opposite. I used to gossip about people, but now I want to encourage people. You see, one was tearing people down. Now I want to build people up. You know, so I think that this thought is worth considering. You know, and even though they're not the perfect center, they are the dividing point between God and man, and I think that's significant. Yeah, Israel. Okay, so we're talking about like sins of omission and commission type thing. Oh, and you're concerned, let's not add extra law. Okay. Did you finish your thought? Okay. So the best I could say is that what is God trying to give Israel? What he's trying to give them to, because you'll find that Jesus works the commandments into people's lives as well. And what he's ultimately trying to do is give them a new heart. That's what they need. They need a heart that thinks like his heart. So, what he'll do in just a second, Israel, is as soon as the Ten Commandments end, he starts what's called the Book of the Covenant. Everybody say that out loud. Book of the Covenant. Let's say it again. Book of the Covenant. Do you know what the Ten Commandments, except one spot, are called? They're not called the Ten Commandments. They're called the 10 Words. And then he enters into what we'll talk about when we get to Exodus 21, which is the Book of Covenant, okay? Now this is how it works. Okay, the 10 Commandments are over here. What do I got? All right, so these are the 10 Commandments. All right, or the 10 Words. The 10 Words is what they're called. All right, then what he does in the Book of the Covenant is very important, because he'll take, I believe it's 4 of the commandments, and he doesn't take them in any particular order. He just takes a sampling of the commandments and what we'll see in the Book of the Covenant, and he turns a word into a paragraph. He takes one of these commandments and then writes a bunch of different things about how that commandment surfaces in this situation, in this situation, in this situation, in this situation. And then he takes another commandment and he shows how it breaks down into this. And he breaks it all down. The Book of the Covenant is him taking sample commands, sample words, and then doing a drop down with them and say, this one thing shows up with this. This one command of you shall not steal shows up when you are walking through a field and you see your enemy's cow. And you know it's your enemy's. And it's stuck. Can't get out. and you just walk home. That's stealing. That's related to stealing, or that's related to lying. I can't remember. I think it's the stealing where he has that. So, in other words, these 10 words, you think they only imply you shall not lie. But if you're at court and Nathaniel is on trial for murdering someone, and the person was murdered at such a time of day, that's when somebody found the body, and you actually were hunting with Nathaniel during that time, so it wasn't Nathaniel. But Nathaniel, when you guys were hunting together, he shot a deer and you didn't get one, and he kept making fun of you for not getting one. So you're kind of mad at Nathaniel right now. So even though Nathaniel was with you and he couldn't have killed this person, you're in the court and Nathaniel's like, help me out, man. And you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's lying. It's related to lying. Do you see that? So Israel the point of the book of the covenant was to say, these are just samplings of my heart, but these one little pinches of my heart go in a million different directions that are all related to these core beliefs. Okay? So that's what happens with the book of covenant. But all of that is to demonstrate that it's not enough to obey these laws. These laws need to be on your heart so that when you enter any situation, you know that you're stealing, even though it may not feel exactly like stealing. It's related. So it affects that. And so Israel, my big answer to your question is what God is after is he's after these things being on your heart. And it's not to earn salvation, it's to reflect his character. But if you don't reflect his character, he'll kill you. Like imagine a dad has a son that's addicted to drugs. Okay? And, he's getting his drugs from a drug dealer, but there's been times in his life where the drug dealer has come and attacked him because he hasn't paid him on time. Okay? Now, let's say that dad has 3 young daughters, and this is their older brother. And his son came home one day totally beaten to a pulp by his drug dealer because he wasn't paying him. Okay? Is it loving of the dad to keep that son in the house when that drug dealer might come and hurt the girls? Or should he say to the son, you can't live here anymore? What's the right thing to do? Yeah, call the police, for sure. But guys, there comes a time where the right thing to do is to remove that son from the house and say, you are not, in your current state, you are not welcome here because you put everybody else at risk. So you have to go. That's church discipline. You don't look like Jesus in what you're doing. A guy's coming to church and his wife's sitting over here and he's sitting over here with his mistress. And he's coming up and taking communion. You think Michael's going to let that happen? He's going to say, this is not for you. You drink this and eat this, you're inviting what on yourself? Judgment. We can't call you part of the body when you're living like this. So, what does Jesus say? The first person goes to him and says, hey, you gotta move out and go back to your wife. Then more than one goes and says, hey, you gotta stop this. And then the whole church does. And if he doesn't listen to the entire church, then you hand him over to Satan for the destruction of his flesh so that he can start living by the Spirit. And there's only one of two options. It's either he has not ever been of the Spirit and he's been deceived, or he's of the Spirit and he'll return or be killed. Those are the only two options. And man, guys, I experienced this firsthand. A guy had joined our church, and I just was concerned about it when he joined, but it was just kind of a suspicion I had. Well, it turned out that he had been church disciplined from another church and came to our church. So he was currently under church discipline at another church. So I found that out, and I approached him just one-on-one, and I said, "Hey, we need to talk." And he got really, really upset. He lied on his church application. We asked him that question. We ask everybody joining the church, "Are you currently under church discipline at another gospel preaching church?" And they say yes or no. And he lied and didn't put the previous churches he'd been to and stuff. And then when I confronted him, it just went all crazy. And he started saying all kinds of bad things about the church and yada, yada, yada. He threatened us with lawsuits and all this kind of stuff. And I went on a wilderness trip. And he was in his early 50s. And I came off the wilderness trip. And I turned on my phone because I'd been gone for a week. And the first thing I saw was he died in his sleep. I'll never forget that moment. And guys, that actually encourages me. He was in his 50s and died way prematurely in his sleep. That encourages me that he was a believer, because God killed him. So that was actually an encouraging thing for me. Guys, what had he been doing at our church while he was under church discipline at another church? He had been taking the Lord's Supper. And Paul says, if you take this improperly, you will fall asleep. He'll kill you. And it happened. It was very wow. Sobering. It was sobering. So this is what God does to the people that are his, that don't have his mind and his heart. He just wipes them off the map. Yeah. Yeah. Silly. And you've got to call that out. You've got to say, look, 1 Timothy 4, there is nothing evil on earth. Guys, choose whatever you want to choose. A computer. Can this thing be evil? No, this thing can't be evil. It just sits there all day long. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't get up. It doesn't press its own buttons. It is just a computer. Can I do horrendous evil with this computer? Absolutely I can. This is a bottle of wine. What does this bottle of wine do? Absolutely nothing. It sits down, doesn't do anything. What can make evil out of this bottle of wine? Only one thing. A person. Or I can let this be a gift of God and use it wisely and enjoy it to the glory of God. But as soon as I start looking like an idiot, I'm not handling it the way God wants me to. And so, there's a pastor I enjoy. This is a while back, and the girl, his wife and daughter wore pants instead of a dress to church. Okay? And people started talking about them, that they should dress differently. They should wear dresses all the time. They shouldn't wear pants. And so he came home and he said to them, for the next 3 months, I want you to wear pants every single Sunday. Okay, what was he doing? He was coming at that because that's wrong, right? So, do not call evil what God calls good. Paul says. Or no, he actually says, don't let someone call evil what God calls good. Now that makes it all the more interesting, because he's talking about if your brother struggles with drinking too much wine, you should be careful about how and you're comfortable with drinking wine and don't sin with it. You should be careful about how you drink or don't drink with him. Namely, don't let him call your good evil. Because with love trumps liberty. My liberties are trumped by my brother. So, I enjoy having a beer or drinking wine. I have a dear brother that is a former alcoholic. He's like as close as you can get. So whenever we're together, I would never do that. I would never, and I'm not getting drunk or anything like that, but I would just never do that for sake of him. Now, he probably would be okay with it, but I just don't. And I think that's getting to where Paul's at with these sorts of things. But we also have to not err on the other side and not encourage anything, because the Bible encourages things. It encourages you to take care of the poor. So I think we should say that. It encourages you to be hospitable and invite people into your home. So you should preach hospitality. In faith, preach hospitality. You're not being hospitable so you go to heaven. You're being hospitable to show people what heaven's like. So, it's like walking a mountain ridge line, right? So you walk this ridge line, you fall off one side into legalism, you fall off the other side into antinomianism, no law, lawlessness. And it's walking the middle, which is obeying the law the way Abraham obeyed the law before there was a law. How did Abraham obey? Genesis 26:5. By faith, by trusting God. This is the work of God, that you believe in him who he sent. But ultimately, the point I'm trying to make is when you live by faith, you naturally, according to the Spirit, obey God. And that's what God's trying to get Israel to go into with the Ten Commandments.